I'm excited about the message this morning for that very same reason. Yesterday, we celebrated July 4th. And if your neighborhood was anything like my neighborhood, it was very loud last night. So I went out very early to see if I could get the cats into the building because that's their safe place. And they were nowhere to be found because while I was out picking berries at 9 o'clock yesterday morning, some people were letting off these gigantic explosions down on Speedway. And I'm thinking, I don't know exactly what it is. I don't think the building blew up, but it sounds like it might have. But it's because there's more than one, and the fire department didn't come rushing in. I figured it had to be fireworks. But this is our 4th of July, and it's what we do. It's what we call Independence Day. It's a day that we celebrate the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and this was when our country began. And so with it comes all of this hoopla, all of this celebration, all of this stuff. Now last week I told you that Father had given me a marvelous message for this week, but you know, it's kind of like whenever you go and you look on a menu and you see the name of the entree, but there's really no description that goes along with it, and you don't know exactly what's in it. And so I knew the topic, but it's all I had. It's like reading a menu with no description whatsoever, but I'm excited nonetheless. And so I said, it's going to be good. And then I'm waiting. And until Father fixes the plate, and I gain more of an idea as to what we're going to be talking about. And what he told me we're going to be talking about are golden calves. Now you think, golden calves? Seriously? And that's all God told me. That's what Father says, we're talking about golden calves. And of course, and in your mind and in my mind, where does that bring you? When you think about a golden calf, we think about the
idolatry.
We think about the Israelites at Mount Sinai, because that is the most famous of the golden calves. Well, last week we talked about the Israelites. We talked about the Ark of the Covenant and its significance to our lives today. And today we're going to pick up with that same theme, where we're looking at Moses and the people of Israel and their time in the wilderness. And of course, that business of the golden calf. That is all found in the story of Exodus. Exodus is that crossing of the Red Sea. This was a people who had been in slavery for how long?
400.
Over 400 years is what the word says. And so they had been there for generations. And this was the only... How long has America been here? We celebrated, yesterday was our birthday. What birthday was it? 244. That seems like a long time ago. How long were the Israelites in Egypt? 400 years. That's a lot of generations removed. And so this is who the people are. And so as we are taking a look at our story today and this Exodus, this was a people who all they'd known was slavery, and they longed for the promises. The promises that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then, as they are waiting, as they're praying, we have the birth of Moses, and we know that story. No one saw it coming, but God was making the moves, the necessary moves, putting him in place for this Exodus, for this Independence Day that they were going to experience. Now, can you imagine? Can you imagine being alive in those days? As you're watching the hand of God, as you're looking at those 10 plagues. And this is that God, that persona that's been in all of our stories, all of those stories that have been told from generation to generation. And now all of a sudden we see all of this stuff happening. Now these first 3 plagues, where the water turned to blood, the frogs and the gnats, those affected the entire land. But then beginning with the 4th one, God drew a line. It will not affect the land of Goshen. And so they did not feel the effect of the flies or the diseased cattle. They didn't have the boils. They didn't, the hail and the fire did not fall on their land. There was like a curtain and nothing went past it. The locust, the darkness that lasted for days, and finally, that last plague, that death of the firstborn, that night of the Passover when God protected his people. They are watching all of this. And on that morning after, it's as if the people were so glad that to get them out of there, they were not sad to see the last of them leave, at least for a little while. Now, if you can imagine, this is a map, and then the red line there is their path. There's actually a lot of argument concerning the timeline and the location of all of these things. But as they left the city of Ramesses, it took them about 25 days to get down to the Red Sea. 25 days. Now, how many people left? The word says that there are about 600,000 men. With their families, it can number up to about 2.4 million people. So you have this gigantic throng coming out of Egypt. How many miles a day can they travel? 15. 15 miles a day. Now, if Marcy and I were traveling at that rate, how long would it take us to get to where Ian and Bailey live? It'd take us about 80 days to get there. Okay, just to put it in perspective, from here to Stillwater, Oklahoma, it'd take us 80 days traveling 15 miles a day. And so, these people, it took them a while to get there. It's not like they walked out and the next day they're at the Red Sea. They are there. So, the people in Egypt, the Pharaoh is having time to think about, wait a second, the bricks aren't getting made. And so they go, and we know that story. Now, as they are traveling, as they're traveling down, and they get to the Red Sea, this sea is what separated them between Egypt and freedom. And so when the Red Sea opened, this was their doorway to independence. This crossing of the Red Sea was their Independence Day. Now, could you imagine walking through on this dry seabed with these walls of water on either side? If we were there, what would it have been like? We know from the word that there was a pillar of fire at night, a pillar of cloud by day that led them. As they were moving along the way, they had this visible presence of God before them. It would be something we would never forget. If miracles like this were to happen today, we would never forget it. We would change our lives. After about 60 days, they arrived in the wilderness of Sinai. And that's what the word says. Here in Exodus 19, it says, on the first day of the third month, which says 2 months have passed, so that's around 60 days, right? And so they are there at Sinai, and they have traveled 435 miles. 435 miles. We hop in the car. We can go there in just a few hours' time, can't we? Depending on how fast you're driving, of course. But again, it's not that far today, but they had traveled 60 days, 435 miles. And they were hot, they were tired, they were miserable, and they had done forgot about the plagues. They had done forgot about all the marvelous things that God had done for them, because they were hungry, they were thirsty, they were hot, they were miserable. Now, we're going to pick up with this story in Exodus 19. And so they arrived there, and they set out, and they entered the desert of Sinai, and they camped there in front of this mountain. If you can imagine this mountain, they're out in the wilderness. There is nothing there. There's just this big, foreboding mountain up there. The fire's not on top of it yet. But it's just this big mountain in the middle of nowhere, and there's two almost 2.5 million people camped in front of it. You can imagine the size of camp it is. We used to go down to Bulltown. I know there are some of you that enjoy that kind of thing, but this is, can you imagine 2.5 million people camped out in front of the mountain, and they're waiting. Now, once they get there, Moses goes up to God and says, we're here. And God says, because then the Lord called to him from the top of the mountain. And this is what God says. And this is in Exodus 19, 5 through 6. And he speaks these words to Moses. Moses is not unaccustomed to having God speak to him audibly. He says, now, if you will obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations, you'll be my treasured possession. What covenant is he talking about? The Abrahamic covenant. The covenant that he made with Abraham, that they would be his people. Part of that covenant, part of that understanding was that they would be enslaved for 400 years. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And these are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. At this point in time, God is speaking to Moses only. Now, God told him, get ready, because in 3 days I am coming down to the top of the mountain. And in those 3 days you need to purify yourself and sanctify your hearts. And so, it's kind of like waiting for a test. You don't know what's coming, but the God who has done all of these marvelous, miraculous things is coming down now. And I've got 3 days to get ready. And so on the third day, seems like there's a lot of things that happen on the third day. On the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, and everyone in the camp trembled. You can imagine. If you put yourself in that circumstance, you can feel that apprehension. Here is this God. Here is a mountain on fire. There's nothing up there to burn, but it's burning nonetheless. What a day that was. And then, Exodus 20 then. This is what God says. And he speaks audibly to the entire people. In Exodus 20, he gives the 10 commandments. And he speaks it out. And the very first thing he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. Don't forget that. Out of that land of slavery, you shall have no other gods before me. What did they have in Egypt? Other gods. There are other things that they had been very accustomed to. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven, or on the earth, or beneath the earth, or the waters below. And he continues down, this is verses 1 through 4, it continues down through verse 17, with all of the 10 commandments as we know them. And so, skipping down to verses 18 and 19, and when the people saw the thunder and the lightning, and heard the trumpet, and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance. They had been told, don't come up to the base of the mountain. It will not be good for you. But they shrunk back. And they said, Moses, speak to us yourself, and we will listen. We do not have God speak to us, or we will die. Not that that cause them to die, but inside of them, their spirits were wilting because they were so afraid. They wanted, Moses to this point in time had been that mediator, that intermediary, that person that came between them and God. And they wanted it to continue. Today, many of us want the same thing. We want there to be a person between us and God. We don't want to have to listen individually. Skipping down to Exodus 24. A while later, within the next few days, God invited a bunch of people, the leaders of Israel, to come up the mountain. So Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, those are Aaron's sons, And the 70 elders, these are the people in charge of the tribes. These are the 70 elders. They became the Sanhedrin later on. They went up and saw the God of Israel. And this is one of the more puzzling pieces of Scripture as we come along. Because as they go up, they see the Lord. And under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli. Which is a stone as blue as the sky. And so these are people that walk up. And there's nothing on top of that mountain. There's nothing in this world like that. So the only thing I can imagine is that they stepped through a doorway into the heavens where God was. And they ate and they drank with him. They sat down to a meal. These are 70 people. These are 74 people that went up there and they saw God. They were in his presence in another place. And I'm saying all this as I'm laying in a foundation here. And the Lord said to Moses, he says, now, what we're going to do is you're going to come up and I'm going to give you the stone tablets that have these words written on them. And while he was there, he's also giving them the basis of this is how the worship is going to be. This is going through all those rites, those religious rites, as to what made Israel a nation unto God. And so as we're going on through there, then we have all of those directions. Now I want to let's get back there. I want to focus on that word. What word do you suppose I should focus on? This one. Instruction. He said, I will give you this tablets of stone with the law and commandments I have written for their instruction. Remember the word Torah? Torah means instruction, to teach. This is not, he did not say, these are the commands I expect them to obey. These are his commands for their instruction. Now, so Moses gathers his things and he heads up the mountain. And he enters a cloud. And he stays on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. How long is that? 40 days is about
6 weeks.
6 weeks, 7 weeks. 42 is 6 weeks. So about 6 weeks they're up there. And when he didn't return, they gave up. They gave up hope. So this is Exodus 32, because everything between 24 and 32 are those other things that Moses received. When the people saw that Moses was long coming down from the mountain, they gathered on Aaron and says, come, let us make gods who will go before us. As for this fellow who brought us up out of Egypt, as for our fearless leader, we're out here alone. We don't know where he is. We don't know if he's coming back. No one can stand in that inferno and live. Why don't we do something about it? We don't know what has happened. So they turned to his assistant, Aaron, the one who yielded the rod, who turned the water into blood, who did all of these things with that rod of Moses. So they turned to him because he's the next in line. And they say, make us a god. And so they did. And so they did. They truly had a sacred cow, as it were. The word says, then, after they had made this thing, they said, look, Israel, these are your gods who brought you up out of Egypt. What did God say? What did God say the very first commandment? You will not make any image of me. And yet here they are. We're going to call this the golden calf incident. Okay? When Moses did come back and saw the golden calf, he proverbially had a cow about it. And Aaron just simply said, you know, All I did, I just put the gold into the fire, and this is what came out. Magically, I'm sure. Are you astonished? I know I am. How could they do such a thing? That was so wrong on so many levels. You said, I would never do such a thing like that. If it was me, I would never have done such a thing. Well, maybe I should put the emphasis on a different word. I would never do such a thing. After all. Now let's go back and review just a little bit here. After all, we would say, we wouldn't do that. After all, look what they had. They had heard the audible voice of God. How many of us here have heard the audible voice of God? Just like the Israelites, we would be scared to death if we heard such a thing. But they heard it. They heard the commands. They heard what he said. They saw the fire on the mountain. In fact, the fire is still up on the mountain as they're doing this very thing. They saw the pillar of cloud and fire. This thing that had led them along and protected them along the way. In fact, it was still there. And they still did this thing. Aaron was still there. This is that man who had the power of God in his hands. As long as he had that staff, he was able to work mighty miracles. And they still did this. The 70 leaders, all of their leadership had met and ate and drank with God. And still. All right, that's it. They're guilty. We're so very quick to judge, aren't we? So very quick to judge. I've heard all the facts. I'm issuing my judgment. The fact of the matter is that we don't know, as a people, what we would do. We don't know that we would have done anything any differently. Today, and again, with our society being what it is today, our people pick up a cause and they run with it. And oftentimes they're at odds against each other as there are different factions within us. We pick up something and we run with it. We don't know exactly where we're going to end up, nor do we know exactly what we want it to do. But because in the heat of the moment, we decide we're going to do something. Here are a few facts I want us to consider this morning. As we take a look at these people, before or as we are rushing to judgment, just taking a look. First of all, they spent 430 years in slavery. This is all they've known. They didn't have, that's all they knew. Their leader is missing. This man who could call down fire from heaven, who could do all manner of things, who could hit a rock and have water spray out of it. He's gone. The leader that they've been following, the one that they've been trusting, their intermediary between God and them, he's gone. He's been missing for 6 weeks. These are people who have no spiritual depth. Now, they've been living their life for 400 and some years. And along comes Moses with all of these miraculous signs and wonders. People aren't sure exactly how long the plagues lasted, but it could be anywhere from 3 to 7 weeks. As we're going along, by the time you add in the days in between, how long the different plagues lasted, anywhere from the minimum of 3 weeks to maybe 7 weeks. They traveled for about 8 weeks, okay? Taking about 60 days to get there. They had, Moses has been on the mountain for 40 days. So altogether, that's somewhere around 21 weeks. This is the first that they've known anything, the first that they've seen anything about this God that they're serving. 5 months they're around. 5 months. Keep in mind that there is no Mosaic law for them to follow. They have no Torah. There's nothing written. They have no temple that they're going to worship in. No one to tell them how to do this. They have no spiritual depth. They have no experience whatsoever at self-governance. They've been slaves. They've been told when to get up, when to go to bed, what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and then beaten unmercifully if they didn't meet those expectations. They could not govern themselves. And probably most important, they were alone and afraid. Here is this deity, unlike anything they've ever seen. There's nothing between him and us at this point in time. Anything could come down off that mountain. And they were afraid. Just a little understanding as we go along. The sin that they committed was not the calf, per se. Now you can exhale now, because I realize that's a pretty provocative statement. That wasn't the sin. The sin wasn't the object. The sin was replacing what they were uncomfortable with something that they were familiar with. And that is something that we all do. What is a golden calf? And that's one of those things as Father and I were talking about. What is that golden calf then? It's not that statue. A golden calf is what we turn into a surrogate for God, a representation, something that has control in a given situation. Whenever we lose sight of what God is doing, we oftentimes will put something else in its place that makes us feel better. The people had heard all the commandments. They heard every one of them. But what was the problem? They had no relationship with the giver of the commandments. He was new. This was all new to them. In education, in educational psychology, we call this a lack of schema. We don't have anything, we have no prior knowledge, we have no prior experience to connect this new thing to. And so we have no way to assimilate it. We have no way to make it our own. They had no relationship. So what was their experience over 400 years? Yes, this was the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. This was the stories that they'd been living, that they'd grown up with. But these men had been dead for centuries. So then, for many of them, they were nothing more than like those flannel graph figures that we have in Sunday school. Kind of like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, the founding fathers. That's only been 244 years ago. But they are just pieces of history. They have no direct bearing on what we do today. We tell the stories of these men, but they are stories. Now, the people of Israel followed the teachings for a while. But having been there for so many years, for so many generations, the culture and the belief systems of Egypt had crept into part of what they were doing. Let's take a look at a couple of those beliefs. The God of the original God of Egypt, when it was first formed, was a deity named Ptah. Take a look at who Ptah was. He's the creator God, who created all things with a thought and with a word. Ptah conceives the world by the thought of his heart and gives life through the magic of his word. Does that sound familiar? He says that this was the God whose breath was said to give life to everything from the beginning. How did this happen? Remember a man named Noah? and his 3 sons and the Tower of Babel. You see, this was a very central tenet to their belief. And so as those people spread out and some moved into the Egypt, this was their God. They started out right, but then stuff got added onto it. And one of those things that got added was this thing called Apis, who is known as the herald of Ptah. He was actually considered to be, they worshipped the bull because it was strong, it was courageous, it was a had a fighting spirit. And over the course of time, Ptah fell away. Apis became the representation of Ptah. And you notice there is a disc here between the horns. That's because Apis is the son of the sun god, which is another part of their religion, which is Ra. And this is a part of that. And Apis became the entity of this creator God. The golden calf simply takes the place of God in a person's life. This personification, this representation, became God. Because the calf was familiar. It's something that they had known for generations. It is what came out of the fire. Became their representation of God. The Hebrews simply fell back on something that they were very familiar with. In a time of uncertainty, they were reaching for something that they were familiar with. And out of it came the golden calf. That is all the Israelites had known for generations. What does God look like? He looks like a bull. He is strong. He is courageous. He has a fighting spirit. But were they guilty? Yes, God declared them so. But we have more of an idea as to how they got there, how they ended up there. It wasn't a matter of determining I'm going to do something different. It's a matter of needing to find something to rely on. What are they guilty of? They were guilty of relying on faulty supports. And what are those supports? Well, if you look underneath your chair there, what do you have? Legs. Those are supports. If you drive across a bridge, what's underneath of it? Supports. You're sitting at a table. There are supports. We all rely upon supports. And they were relying on cultural supports. So what exactly are faulty supports? What do those look like? Well, first, the thing that we will oftentimes revert back to is something we've known, something we've done. It is experience. We call it a testimony also here among us. And it's very powerful. Past experience can help us get through a very tough place. Traditions, cultural expectations. We can rely on those rather than following directions. We can also fall back into failed relationships that did not enrich us, things that did not help us, but they are familiar, so we will return to them. The Israelites, just like us, were looking for a safe place as they were in a very uncomfortable place. Based upon what they've known over the course of time, back in the good old days, we retreat to a safe place. For many of us, it is a place that we grew up. For some of us, the place we grew up is the least safe of all places. But there are places in our memory, places in our heart that we will retreat to because this is where I'm comfortable. This is where I feel safe. And that is where the Israelites were that day. When Father says He's going to do a new thing, what happens inside of you? I'm about to do something new. All of a sudden there is this apprehension, this fear, this doubt, this wondering, what is going to happen? But this is what God said through Isaiah. He says, look, watch closely. I am preparing to do something new. We don't want something new. We want something that works. We want something we're familiar with. It's happening now, even as I speak. And you're about to see it. In 3 days, I'm coming down to the top of this mountain. Get ready. I am preparing a way through the desert. Waters will flow where there had been none. So, where is he leading you? What did the word say? The word says he is leading you through the desert. Yes! Sign me up! Every single one of us, there's been points in time in my life when Father says, listen, bub, we're about to go out to the wilderness again. I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, please. And I oftentimes will find myself out there because it's in those times when God is doing something new in my life. And I'm out there and I'm saying, Father, how can you be out here with me and still be in that same place where I was? What was wrong with that? He says, I am doing a new thing with you. Behold, I am preparing a way through the desert. Now doesn't that look like a picture-perfect place that you want to go? But this is basically what the Israelites ran upon. They were out in the middle of the nothing, with a mountain ahead of them, foreboding, uninviting. Now, and God says he's going to prepare a way in the desert, and he's going to cause water to flow where there usually isn't any. Now, my question to you is this. Are you going to see the water and the way before you get there? No. He's simply leading you through the desert, into the wilderness. And so what will you do when you lose sight of Father? And you lose sight of all that's familiar, all of those moorings that you built your life on, that you hold your life to? Will you pull out a personal golden calf? The golden calf doesn't have to be a statue or a monument. It doesn't have to be something tangible. It can be most anything that serves as that surrogate, something that brings me hope and comfort apart from God, something that I know, something I'm familiar with. As Marcy and I were talking about this the other day, she says, so, some examples, please? What are some examples? And you know, there are some, they're in there. This happens before the Israelites left. Okay? We know these people. Abraham and Sarah, they had been given a promise. A promise they had to wait 25 years for. The Israelites got tired after 40 days. These people got tired after about 15 years. You see, there was this old custom that was in their land. It wasn't from God, but it was a custom of the land they lived in. And that is, if the wife, if she was unable to have children, was able to bring her handmaiden or bring a concubine to the husband, and that would be their way to make this happen. You see, this is the truth. If the front door won't readily open, maybe the back door will. We'd never do anything like that, would we? That is putting a surrogate in the place of God. I'll figure out a way to make this happen. Gideon and his fleeces. Gideon, the angel appeared to him and says, "Greetings, mighty man of valor." Who's he talking to? I'm hiding in a pit, trying to whip out some grain. Who's this mighty man of valor? The Lord is with you. And he didn't believe it. And so what does he do? He has these silly little tests that he has God, that he puts God to. And he says, God, if you will do such and such, then I will know this is your will. Sound familiar to anybody? We've all done it. You see, it's not, well, I never made a golden calf. Yes, you did. You didn't have a statue sitting on the table, but you put something between you and God that you were depending on. You were depending on the fleece, not on God. What other calves do we have? Cultural beliefs and superstitions. Here in the hills of West Virginia, we have superstitions out the ears. We call them old wives' tales. But I tell you, when I see the first snow, I know, what day of the month is it? 5. Good, we're only going to have 5 snows this year. That's what my grandmother said. It's a cultural belief. We are Americans. We just had our 4th of July. We are strong, proud, independent, and no one's going to tell us what to do. Gets us in trouble far more often than it should. But we hold it up. Religious traditions. Well, this is just the way we've done things in this church forever. And I'd rather you not sit in that seat, because that's where my family's been sitting now for generations. And if you just don't like the way we do things around here, well, past experiences is another golden calf. We talked about this somewhat. I remember back in the day, in the good old days, when habits and addictions are very powerful. We try to break out of them, and we lay them down with our own strength. And when the going gets tough, we want to pick them back up. It's of something familiar, and we find ourselves back in that place again. It is a golden calf. Hurt feelings. Hurt feelings are very powerful too. There's nothing like scraping the scab off to remind you of how bad it hurt. You see that fresh pain, that fresh sight of blood? Gives you reason to hold on to it. I have every right to feel like this. And self-righteousness, this better than you attitude, this holier than thou attitude, this yeast of the Pharisees is what Jesus called it. I know more than you do. It's arrogance. We put that between us and God. Life can get hard. We can go through some very, very difficult circumstances. We know this adage. When the going gets tough,
Get going.
that's not how I heard it. I heard it like this. The tough make cookies. That's Fairmont. When the going gets tough, we generally say the tough get going. We pull up our socks and we move on. After all, we are Americans. We're going to get through. We're going to grit our teeth and make it happen. But there are points in time when that pathway forward is not clear. Like with this picture, I showed this last week. We have more than one choice to make. How am I supposed to know? Well, I can't just simply sit there in the middle of the road and wait forever. What choices do we have? When we find ourselves in these difficult places, what choices do we have? I suppose we could go back to Egypt. And that's what the people talked about. You see, after a while, all they could remember was, remember all that good food we used to eat down there? And we didn't, it was always, there's just an abundance of it. We didn't have to only eat this manna and quail. But they had forgotten about the bondage. They'd forgotten about the mistreatment. They'd forgotten about the humiliation. They'd forgotten all the bad pieces of it. And so they wanted to return to it. It was an uncomfortable familiarity. Do we press ahead? It's not a question. It's a declaration. Yes, we press ahead. We move forward. We move forward. The Word says, this is what Paul says here in Philippians 3. He says, I am leaving my old life behind. I'm putting everything on the line for this mission that we call life. I am sprinting toward the only goal that counts, to cross that line, to win the prize, and to hear God's call to resurrection life found exclusively in Jesus. That is the Voice translation. It is powerful. The Word also says, it is for freedom, particularly here at Independence Day. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. So stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. He has set us free. The chains have been broken. We are free from judgment. We are free from judging ourselves, judging others, and being judged by others. We have been set free from that. We are set free from tradition, those cultural expectations, those things that we've always done. We are no longer bound by those things. We are set free from uncertainty. No, we will not always know what that next step is going to be. When we can't see where that next step is, we are no longer bound by uncertainty. We are free from those things that confuse our mind. Those things that cause us to doubt and to leave us helpless and hopeless. We are free from bitterness. Bitterness is like a terrible root that gets inside of us, like an invasive species. One of those things that's kind of like Chinese lantern. It ends up everywhere, and it takes a long time to get rid of it. It is bitterness. All of those wrongs that have been done to you, all of those slights, all those disappointments that you've endured. We are free to forgive, and we're free to move forward. We are free from our past. Whether you grew up in a very privileged situation or grew up in a very impoverished situation, those things have no chain on you. Regardless of those days, those words, those events, those things that have happened to you, you are not bound any longer. Jesus has set us free. We are free from the power of sin. Do we sin? Yes. But it has no power to separate us from God any longer. That which is that natural proclivity has been broken. We are free to make good choices. We're free to make right choices. We are free to make different choices. We are not bound by this sin. We are free. And the Word says, when the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. So, with that, I wish you happy Independence Day. You have been set free.